I guess my general purpose here today is to make sure that I contribute to this forum, that I contribute to the, passing the knowledge, some of the things that have been helpful to me in my career and in becoming a better leader over time. So looking at generally at any assets that sit on our balance sheet, be them fixed assets or be them current assets, they will generally depreciate in time. When we look at human resource assets, and I'll call them assets today because human resources, they are an asset to the company. In fact, we will realize that human resources, they actually appreciate in time. Their value increases in time. People in an organization become more skilled, more knowledgeable, and they acquire a wider and a larger sense of commitment towards a company as time passes. Now, the human resources, the human asset, it does not sit on a balance sheet. We do not see it. We do not manage it on a balance sheet. However, when we manage what's on our balance sheets, the assets that are on our balance sheets, we give quite a bit of attention and a very structured approach. It's a very scientific approach on how we manage those assets. And a company has any company has a goal of increasing those assets and eventually increasing its net equity. When we look at human resources, are we applying the similar structures, similar tools, similar frameworks, and similar scientific approach as we are for the non-human resources? Now, of course, there are many structures and tools and processes that are being applied very successfully in the HR management area. But when we speak about motivation, when we speak about creating a climate in an organization, a positive climate, when we speak about creating a culture, a positive culture in an organization, do we rely on certain frameworks, on certain scientifically proved tools that we as leaders can apply? Now, today, I would not like to go in showing certain techniques of how to motivate employees and people in your organization, but rather I'd like to talk about some fundamentals that will enable you to do that. The first one that I'd like to bring forward is the 6 leadership styles that have been put forward by Daniel Goleman. It's one of my favorite authors, and I invite any of you to pick up his books. I'm sure many of you being involved in HR management have read one of his books at one point. Now, in one of his books, in a book called Primal Leadership, he brings up 6 leadership styles. And when you look at them, they do something that we're familiar with. The first one is the visionary style. It's basically a leader that will show the way, a leader that will show the top of the mountain, will explain to his team why they have to get there, and will mobilize his team to follow him without actually having to push. They will follow him. The message here is basically, come with me. There's a democratic leadership style. This is a style that invites people to join at the decision table. It invites people to participate in the decision-making process. And in fact, it's a very, very useful and very efficient style to get buy-in from team members, especially in difficult projects, in long projects that eventually will extenuate people, and you need their initial buy-in. There's the coaching style. I'm sure you're familiar with this. It's a leadership style that focuses on developing people. You know the saying, don't bring the man the fish, bring him the tools to catch the fish. Well, this is a style that will focus on the people, on developing the people, for them to then be able to perform the tasks and their work in the organization at a better level. There is the affiliative leadership style. And this is a style that a leader will focus on the people first. This is a leader that will show active interest in the well-being of people, will actually show active interest in the well-being of the family of the people that he manages, will get to know their families. There is the pace-setting leadership style. It's a style where the leader will start to march at a high pace. Usually it requires, there's a certain need for this style. There are times when the marching at high speed is required, and the leader is setting the pace. He's involved with his team, he's there with his team, and he demands that the team run at the same pace as he does. Then there is a dictatorial. Unfortunately, I'm sure all of us have come across this leadership style, and it's a style that is more known as being the boss. And the message here is, I'm the boss, and I will tell you how to do it, when to do it, and you have to do it now. Now, a seasoned leader is none of any of these. Of course, someone that's more visionary will generally be able to generate more from his team, because he creates that intrinsic motivation, which is far stronger than any extrinsic motivation that can motivate people. But a very seasoned leader, he's actually one of all of these. Of course, with a more predominance of the positive leadership styles, which will be the first four: the visionary, democratic, coaching, and affiliative. Now, look, this sounds a bit technical, but those that know me, they know that I do like a good framework, and I definitely like to quantify things and to put things in structures that are applicable not only in my presence, but is applicable when I'm not around and in the wider organization. So to me, this is something that I believe you can take and you can apply from today. Now, we speak about these 6 leadership styles, and obviously they affect the organizational climate. Now, when we speak about organizational climate, again, what do we define as organizational climate? Do we have any measures? Are we able to identify what are the drivers that define this organizational climate? And in fact, yes, we can. So this research, the one that have identified the 6 leadership styles and the one that has identified the 6 measures or drivers of an organizational climate, has been done by a consultancy company called Hay McBurr. It was in the late 90s, and they have, from a pool of 20,000 leaders, C-level executives, they've picked up close to 4,000 of them, and they have followed the actions and the impact of these leaders on their organizations, on their team around them. And they were basically able to identify these 6 leadership styles that, in a way, cover the spectrum of the styles that a leader can employ. And they've defined these 6 measures of organizational climate that a leader impacts. And again, these are very intuitive, but it's about the intuition being transformed into a framework. So intuitively, one of them is flexibility. Basically, it's how flexible are people in an organization, how flexible they are to innovate, to do things the way they perceive to be the best way. The level of responsibility that employees feel towards a company, the level of standards that people set for themselves in that organization, the perception of rewards that is present in an organization. And here's the perception of rewards, not necessarily monetary, but rather also non-monetary. The way the feedback is being given, the way certain successes are being celebrated together and are being rewarded. The level of clarity that employees have about where is the company going, about its mission, about its vision, and the overall general sense of commitment that employees have towards a company. Now, we may look at this and say, look, this is great. Of course, we want to create a great climate in our organization. But then the question is, but why? Aren't most of the time shareholders, aren't they more interested in the value that we create for them through the performance of the companies that we lead? Well, in fact, the research shows that in a success of a company, the climate of that company will contribute to 1/3 on average, to 1/3 of the company's success. So us being good leaders and being good motivators, it's not only about creating a certain good feeling or a good climate around us, but we as HR practitioners can influence the ultimate success or not of a company. That's why these are very important. These are important frameworks to talk about. Now, we look at these frameworks, and of course, beyond these frameworks, there are many other tools and structures and processes that we know of and we want to apply. But do we always take into consideration the wider cultural setting that we operate in? Do we look at the overall culture of a society that a company is part of? Because eventually the culture of a society will penetrate the culture of a company. And there will be an amalgamation of the culture that we as leaders create in an organization and the culture that is the norm in a society. Now, would it be great, pardon me. So going back just before I'm going to the cultures, I have one more slide here. And indeed, I will start with, wouldn't it be great? Now, I've spoken about the leadership styles, and I've mentioned the 6 organizational climate dimensions. Now, wouldn't it be great for us to have a quantifiable view of how each of these leadership styles affects each of the dimensions of an organizational climate? I think that would be fantastic. And in fact, we can. The same research that I mentioned from Hay and McBurr, they've actually quantified the effect that leaders have on organizations. And those that are familiar with statistics, so +1 is a perfect positive correlation, and a -1 is a perfect negative correlation. Here we can actually see the correlation of the leadership styles that we as leaders apply, how it affects the overall climate in an organization. And from here we can see that if we are predominantly a visionary leader, then we know that in the long run, we will have a positive, with a very high correlation, a positive impact on the organization, on its climate. And if we are predominantly a dictatorial leader, then in the long run, we will have a detrimental effect on the climate in an organization. And as I've mentioned, when we have a detrimental effect on a climate in an organization, this will also impact the financial results, the operating performance of a company. And us as leaders, again, we need to, first of all, be aware of such a framework, and then strive to be that leader that instantly knows what style of leadership is applicable in a certain settings in that specific moment, because even the dictatorial and the pace-setting approaches, they do have their merits. Even the dictatorial for the short run, maybe it's required, to snap out a team out of a comfort zone and get them moving again. Perhaps it's required. But we need to embrace all of these leadership styles and use them as part of us interacting with our teams. Now, moving on to the culture that I was mentioning, to the fact that we are operating in a larger culture, and we are looking from a perspective of what we can do to affect the people around us. But we know that the people that we are trying to affect and to mobilize, they are part of a society. They are part of a society that has certain norms and a culture at its fundamentals. Now, wouldn't it be great if we could also measure, give it some kind of metrics to the culture? Can we describe a culture in numbers? Now, yes, we can. A psychologist by the name of Gert Hofstede, a Dutchman, unfortunately, he passed away in February this year at the age of 91. He was a psychologist, and in his times at IBM in the 80s, so this is quite some time ago, but still very applicable. In the 80s, he was tasked with giving certain tools or certain frameworks to managers and leaders at IBM to be able to manage the business units overseas, IBM back then being a very large company and a large multinational. And for these managers to have a framework, not as a trial and miss, let's try this, let's see if it works, have a clear framework that defines the different cultures and allow managers to apply certain tweaks in the way they manage people based on those cultures. Well, he has defined initially 4 dimensions of a culture, of a society culture, yeah, of a country. After that, he added another 2. Now his work is being taken over by his son, Gert-Jan Hofstede, and is still relevant today. Now, the first one is power distance. I will go through them very quickly. I'm leaving some text here, but again, some of them are very intuitively understandable. So power distance is the distance between powers, be it from the distance between a president and a citizen, being the distance between a manager and the employee. So, for example, in very high power distance societies, if we can take China, for example, the employee does not leave the office until the manager, the boss, has left the office. In very low power distance societies, like the UK, for example, the manager and the employee, they'll go for a beer after work, and they'll know each other's families. So this is one difference that is actually very applicable in the HR management. And there are many other implications of all of these dimensions, even with how the feedback is given, performance reviews, and so on, the way targets are set. So these are important dimensions that a leader should be aware of. The next one is a dimension of individualism versus collectivism. Intuitively, think of USA, which is an individualistic society, versus the South America, for example. Then we have the masculinity versus femininity dimension. In a masculine society, the participants or the members of this society, they will reward this strive for achievement, for success, for amassing material wealth. While in a feministic society, there will be less attention given to that, but more towards how are we enjoying life? Are we humble? Do we have etiquette? Then there's uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty avoidance, in fact, is very much used in marketing, because on one hand, it's the level of adversity that people have towards uncertainty, so how far they want to stay away from it, but also it's, in other words, how much information do people need to make a decision? That's why I said it's in marketing, because, for example, ads, they will be done differently in this market versus another market where information will be given or not. But again, it's very important for HR practitioners to take account of this, to understand how uncertainty averse is an employee. Then there are the last 2. These are the long-term orientation versus short-term orientation, and there's indulgence versus restraint. These 2 dimensions are in fact a bit opposite. So a society that's more long-term oriented, thinking more about the future, they'll be more restrictive today, and the opposite. A society that's more focused on the short term, they will allow themselves to be more indulgent in present moment. Again, for HR practitioners, these are intrinsic drivers of how people act, and understanding these dimensions is very important, because when we want to motivate, and we want motivation is, there's the intrinsic and extrinsic. Extrinsic is all the monetary and other rewards that we give our people, and then, but really the real motivation is the one intrinsic. And when we want to spark this intrinsic motivation, we need to be aware of what makes these people. And we're all made of the culture that we grew up in. So that's why being aware of these cultural dimensions is very important. However, we speak about different frameworks, different structures, different tools, and we apply them to our setting, right? So if you think about the information that we consume, I'm sure all of us here, by simply the fact that we are present at this conference, we all are practitioners that want to develop. We want to grow, we want to become better leaders. And obviously we consume a lot of information and we learn about different tools and techniques of how we can motivate people. But why being aware of cultural dimensions is so important? Because when we take certain knowledge and certain techniques and tools and we want to apply in our setting, is it applicable in the culture that we operate in? And let me give you an example. So here you see the chart that describes the US culture. So as you can see, on the power distance scale, US scores around 40. US is a fairly quite an individualistic society. So on the individualism scale, it will score around 90. Moderate for masculinity, still a very driven society. There is a medium aversity to uncertainty. The long-term orientation is low, so people are more focused on the short-term, and because of that, the level of indulgence is higher. Now, we consume a lot of the content, we listen to the motivational leaders and we read books that are written by authors and are expressed by thought leaders from the United States. But I'm speaking from Chisinau today, from Republic of Moldova. Now, can I apply everything blindly in the society that I operate in? Well, let's see. Let me put Moldova on this chart. And as you can see that Moldova is quite different than the United States. Not worse, not better, it's just different. And then you can see that on the power distance, Moldova scores very high, 90, which means that the members of the society, the norm is to perceive a high distance of power between the president and the citizens, and perhaps also between the manager and the employees. It's their expectations. It's what they expect to see around them, is the norm. It's fairly low on individualism. We're quite a collectivist society. Lower masculinity than the United States. Very high on uncertainty avoidance. People do not like uncertainty. They want to know what's happening around them. They want to know the future. When they make decisions, they will read the fine print. Medium high on long-term orientation and very low on indulgence. So people are quite restrictive in indulging life. Thinking of more of the future, they are becoming more restrictive in the short term. Now, obviously, there's a difference between these two cultures. And in fact, research shows that matching HR practices to local culture, including based on these dimensions, will make those HR practices more palatable, more acceptable by the members of a team, by the employees, and in the long run will become more effective. And what's important for us, it's important that we apply techniques and tools and structures and frameworks that are effective. That's why taking into account the cultural setting that we operate in is very important. And I, from experience, I can tell you that having activated in Western Europe, in Middle East, now in Moldova, there is a very high difference in culture. We all know it, but what's important is to actually be able to see it on a chart. Now, isn't that amazing? Now, it's very important that we look at this kind of, and this is of course not the only, the many different frameworks and tools that create the fundamentals of us being good leaders. And it's important that we look at this because we have a profession. When we're leaders, when we're HR practitioners, we have a profession, and our profession is to manage people. And in managing people, we need to create the best value out of them, and also create environment that is beneficial for the people that we manage. And one more thing that I'd like to mention before I'll end my presentation, that us as leaders, we need to learn how to let go. And let me explain this for a bit. So us as leaders, we need to see a certain circle of control around us. What is a circle of control? It's an arm's length sphere where we can see, we can touch, and we can control how things are done, which direction the things are going, how this is impacting the company. Beyond that, there is a circle of influence. Now it's no longer an arm's length. Now it's a sight length. Now we cannot directly control, but we can indirectly influence. We see how things are being done. We see how what is being applied, what not. We see what's working and what is not working, and we can influence this area. Now, beyond that, this goes beyond control, beyond influence. And in large organizations, this very often happens. One leader at the center, he cannot control the whole organization. And the purpose of organizations is eventually it's also to grow. And as organizations grow, the leader at one point needs to let go of his control and let the organization move faster than him. But in letting go, he needs to be able to steer. Now, how do you steer as a leader? A leader can steer by setting up the correct operating models, the correct structures in an organization. And to me, in the center is the strategy, and around is the formula of people, processes, systems, with people being very important. That's what we're speaking about today. Now, once this operating model is set, then the steering can be applied. It's like driving a car. When we're driving a car, we're holding the steering wheel. We're not actually touching the wheels. We cannot turn, we're not turning the wheels. We are applying steering to the wheels through a steering wheel that is connected through mechanics, which is a structural thing, to the wheels. Now, this is what we as leaders need to create. And very important is that once that is done, we need to know to let go. And if I can make an analogy with what you're seeing now on the screen, with these sportsmen, pushing this sleigh, they all know that at one point, if they just keep on pushing the sleigh, they will not make the sleigh go faster. In fact, they will hold the sleigh down. Now, we as leaders, we need to realize this, and we need to know when is the right moment to let go, jump in the sleigh, and just steer. Thank you very much.